Good afternoon, friends. Yeah, it's on and loud. I'm so glad you're all here, that you made it through the weirdness of this afternoon and the weather and possibility of a tornado and all of that. And now the sun is shining and you're here. And we are so glad to have back Casey Ostern to do a presentation part 2 of 3 on dementia and dementia caregiving. And so I won't give too much away. I just want to offer the reminder that if you were here earlier this year, you may remember her. She started the first session, oh goodness, a couple of months ago at this point. There's been a long break. We do have a recording of that if you want to go back, and we can get that to you from the office. And then also plan to come next week, Wednesday, same time in here for part 3 with Casey back again. So we're just so thankful to have you, Casey, and are looking forward to all you have to share. The floor is yours.
I am happy to be here. So this is part 2. As Dylan said, if you weren't able to make it to part 1, sounds like there's a recording, which feels a little awkward to me, but it's perfect, and you can absolutely go and watch that. Or this is a program that we developed in collaboration with the area agencies on Aging Association across Michigan, as well as the ACL and the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So this program does run all across our area in different ways. There are virtual options, so if you wanted to go back and get the immersive and involved version, you could absolutely do that as well by finding other programs running. So part 2, we are looking at activities for persons with dementia. Just a brief reminder, I know it's been some time since we did part 1. So part 1 was looking at the basics of dementia. If you weren't here or just don't recall. So we were really talking about what is dementia, who has dementia, some of the types of dementia. So remembering that dementia is actually a grouping of symptoms and not a disease in and of itself. And so what are those dementing diseases that cause these dementia symptoms? What's the impact of dementia? So we talked about the 6 cognitive domains that we're identifying as the impacts of dementia. So effect on memory, language skills, perception, comprehension, attention, and reason. And I want to make sure to bring us back to that and be thinking about that in the ways that dementia impacts a person in those areas or domains of thinking. Because as we talk about activities for persons with dementia today, thinking about those areas and how those needs arise out of those areas is going to be important. And then we talked a bit about communication tips last time. So things like speaking to the emotional needs, the accuracy of what a person with dementia might be saying to you might not be there, but there's still communication happening. There's still an emotional need that's often being expressed even when the facts aren't so accurate. So speaking to the emotional needs, somebody who's bringing up a memory of a long-gone parent might be seeking some support or comforting feelings. And so speaking to that, we talked a bit about not correcting the reality of a person living with dementia is very, very truly their reality. And so correcting can just be uncomfortable for everybody and frankly pretty fruitless. So reminder about that. Making sure that you have eye contact when you're speaking to a person living with dementia, that you have their attention, remembering that that attention piece can be affected by the illness, and setting up the environment around to be conducive to communication. So, if there's a lot going on around you, you're not very likely to be able to maintain that attention. So, remembering those pieces from last time, and then we will move into today's presentation. You can skip to session objectives, please. better do my own. All right, so our objectives today then, we are going to talk a little bit about general dementia stages and try to understand what those staging systems look like and how those are used. Learn the benefits of engaging through activities, so engaging with your person living with dementia through activities. We're going to consider how to involve your person in daily life and learn how to modify activities based on a person's abilities. And that's where we'll be kind of thinking back to those areas of cognition, those 6 domains of impact. So that's our objective. Again, I am open to an informal kind of presentation if you want to jump in or have a question at any time. If you prefer to save those to the end, we can do it that way as well, so whatever works for you. All right, so there are many tools for measuring the stage of dementia progression. In the first session, we learned that the severity of a person's dementia can be established through a full dementia evaluation, which is done not only to rule out other reasons for those dementia symptoms, so things like urinary tract infections, dehydration, or medication concerns, so those kind of things. So those evaluations, typically done neuropsych evaluation, if you remember, is the typical way that is completed. So use one to rule out other possibilities. But also, once it is determined that it is dementia, figuring out what is the current state of the person, where are their abilities. So there are a variety of scales used to assess and determine how far an individual's dementia has progressed or the severity of the dementia. These rating scales, so you'll see some of those scales listed on the slide, provide healthcare professionals and caregivers a tool to understand how far along in the disease process the person is. The person is rated in stages, typically. So the most common used, you get mild, moderate, severe. There are some scales that get very, very specific, and you might have a rating of 3.6 or 3.7 on the scale. But generally, that is only used for very, very specific need, looking at like occupational therapy and things, and you're not going to hear that in just sort of the day-to-day world of dementia. So these stages help the medical professionals to develop medical treatment plans, offer a baseline for future assessment, so you're able to track change over time by utilizing these scales. And the stages may also help family and caregivers in all aspects of the care that you need to provide or they need to provide, helping them to understand the person that they're caring for, as well as how to gauge the activities for their person. So the beginning of Alzheimer's, or the pre-symptomatic stage, often starts years before there are noticeable changes or symptoms. So, you're looking at physical brain changes, if you remember back to the earlier presentation. And so, those physical changes in the brain often don't start exhibiting in symptoms for a number of years. And so, people may have Alzheimer's but not yet be symptomatic in that early or beginning stage. But eventually, the brain changes caused by Alzheimer's will result in those first symptoms of cognitive decline, and over time reach the mild cognitive impairment stage. So that's really that first place where it's going to show up on one of these scales. and then a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. And for some people, remembering that mild cognitive impairment is its own sort of symptom bubble, and a person can simply live with mild cognitive impairment for their lifetime. That is not saying that it is progressive dementia. If it is progressive dementia, a person will move out of that mild cognitive impairment phase and into early, middle, late stage dementia. So for many of these individuals, as I said, the dementia will progress through early, mild, and late stages. And we want to make the distinction between early onset and early stage dementia. So early onset dementia is a diagnosis at a young age. So typically 50 and younger, often in a person's 40s. They may be diagnosed with early onset dementia or Alzheimer's. And that is not the same thing as the early stage dementia, which is how impactful the symptoms are at that point. Right? Okay. So the early or mild stage. In the early stages of Alzheimer's, a person may function independently. He or she may still drive, work, be a part of social activities, generally engage in most of the activities that they typically would. But despite this, the person may feel as if they're having memory lapses, such as forgetting familiar words, so difficulty with word finding, or the location of everyday objects, so kind of having those moments where, wait, where did the eggs go? But it's typically kind of comes and goes pretty quickly, and then they're able to continue. They kind of go, oh, right, and move on with the day, and it's okay. So that's that early or mild stage. Other common difficulties in the mild stage of Alzheimer's include trouble remembering names when introduced to new people, having greater difficulty performing tasks in social settings, and really that might be just a little more difficulty managing that input, right? So when there's a lot going on around you, that can be overwhelming, and a person living with dementia has less capacity to manage that incoming information and process it. So you might see greater difficulty performing tasks in social or work settings just because they're busier settings. Forgetting material that one has just read, and increased trouble with planning or organizing. So, sometimes you'll see cooking. If you think about what it really takes to get through a task of preparing a meal, and how many steps there are, and how important the order of those steps really is, you might start seeing in those sorts of tasks in the early stage a little bit more difficulty. So you might see things like food turning out a little saltier for somebody who's typically a very good cook, because they may forget and salt a couple of times, or have turned the stove on and then realized that they haven't done that prep work first, that they really needed to chop the vegetables first, and just kind of those more difficult tasks become more complicated and hard to complete. Right, next slide. So then the middle or moderate stage, as the disease progresses, a person with Alzheimer's will require a greater level of care. In the moderate stage, damage to the nerve cells in the brain can make it difficult to express thoughts and perform routine tasks. During this stage, symptoms will be noticeable to others and may include forgetfulness of events or about one's own personal history. So some of that, like, telling a story they've told a million times, but suddenly the facts are a little bit different. Or, telling stories, but rather than, oh, when I was a kid, this thing happened, the story is now being told as something that happened yesterday, right? So just that kind of more apparent change. Confusion about where they are or what day it is, so a little bit of loss of connectivity to time and person. The need for help choosing proper clothing for the season or occasion might be something that you start seeing in this stage, right? And if you don't know what year it is or what month it is, you might not know you need a sweater. So caregivers are needing to step in and support some of those things in this stage. You may see some more trouble controlling bladder or bowels in some individuals. So for folks who really are struggling with sensation input, that perception, that can also be seen in things like recognizing body signals, right? So if there's difficulty in interpreting body signals, then you may see changes in those toileting concerns and difficulty recognizing when they need to go. You may see some changes in sleep patterns, such as sleeping during the day and becoming restless at night. An increased risk of wandering or becoming lost is something that some people experience in this stage. And personality and behavioral changes, including suspicions and delusions or compulsive repetitive behavior like hand-wringing or tissue shredding or rummaging behaviors. So rummaging is just kind of wandering around getting into things, right, with no apparent purpose, not looking for anything in particular, just sort of fidgeting. And then in the late or severe stage of Alzheimer's, typically, this is the longest stage and can last for many years. In the severe stage of Alzheimer's, individuals lose the ability to respond to their environment. And I think that is written wrong because that is actually not true. In the late stage is not typically the longest stage. That middle stage is. So I apologize for that. But in the late or severe stage, an individual lose the ability to respond to their environment, to carry on a conversation, and eventually to control movement. They may still say words or phrases, but communicating really becomes difficult. So there isn't necessarily intent or understandable intent. I can't say that the person living with dementia doesn't have an intent. It just isn't typically coming across to those around them. And so communication where you can still engage in that back and forth and the flow of conversation, it's not for the shared experience or shared information at that point. And the focus at this stage really shifts to keeping people comfortable. So as memory and cognitive skills continue to worsen, you may see personality changes taking place and the individual needing more extensive help with daily activities. So when we talk about daily activities, those are the things that we all need to attend to get safely and healthfully through the day, right? So that's your bathing and toileting and getting yourself something to eat and navigating your environment and getting out to appointments, getting to the grocery store, just, those sorts of all the things that we do in a typical day. So at this stage, individuals may require full-time, round-the-clock assistance with daily personal care, may lose awareness of recent experiences as well as their surroundings, experience changes in physical abilities, including the ability to walk, sit, and eventually to swallow. And they become very vulnerable to infections, especially pneumonia, which may very well be tied to the decrease in mobility and activity. We know that that can be impactful with pneumonia and the like. All right, next slide. So, activities. Activities are a valuable part of your person's care. They help a person with dementia achieve a sense of order, feel useful, and reinforce their abilities. So whether doing routine tasks or engaging in enjoyable hobbies, activities provide structure to the day. Being engaged provides a sense of purpose and normalcy. It's important to highlight the things your person can do rather than the things that they are no longer able to do. Even if the task isn't done correctly, the benefit is in the doing, right? Just being engaged in our own lives, being engaged in living. It's something that we all want, and living with dementia does not change that for a person. And I know that it's really, really easy to think from that loss perspective and what has changed and what can my person not do anymore. But thinking about the things, the strengths that they retain, the things that they are really good at, the things that they can do will help you to help them be engaged in their life, be an active part of everyday living. And it's just, good mindfulness practice, and can also help combat a lot of those negative feelings of loss, feelings of immobility that can come with the disease, right? There's so much that you can't control that can start to feel really overwhelming. And so in focusing on the strengths that your person has and the things that are going well, that can help alleviate some of that stress that's part of caregiving or can be part of caregiving as well. Next slide. So activities are powerful. People enjoy doing things, gain a sense of accomplishment, which boosts self-esteem. We may not enjoy household tasks, but often feel a sense of satisfaction when they're done, right? So it's not necessarily the act of doing the dishes, but, oh, I'm so good, I got the dishes done. So proud of myself, boosted the self-esteem. We engage in hobbies for the enjoyment and that personal satisfaction. There's a distinct feeling of accomplishment that comes from doing things. So anyone who has been ill or incapacitated for a long time has likely experienced boredom, agitation, and restlessness due to inactivity. If you've ever had that experience of, breaking a bone and having to kind of just sit around for an extended period of time while you healed, and having other people doing everything for you, just those simple things, bringing you a glass of water, which lovely and nice and how great, but also so boring, so agitating sometimes. So if you can kind of call on that experience and remembering that a person living with dementia is in the same place, needing to be able to do whatever they can do in whatever way they can to get that sense of satisfaction and involvement in their own life. And then, that leads to reduction in agitation, wandering, sadness, boredom, a lot of those, when we think about the effects of dementia and caring for somebody with dementia, it's hard not to talk a lot about those behaviors and what may be seen as negative behaviors. And so activities is often the thing that caregivers can do to help mitigate those behaviors. Right, next slide. So understimulation, that's what we're looking at activities. Understimulation is one of the things that we're keeping in mind and that we're fighting against. So persons with cognitive losses are often understimulated, which may be because people around them assume the person is unable to do tasks, and so they just step in and start, doing everything for them. The danger of understimulation is that people with no activities become bored, restless, and depressed. Often they will look for something to do, and then that's where you see like those rummaging behaviors, so emptying drawers, pulling everything out of the closet, just sort of exploring cabinets, hiding items, lots of lost remotes in this behavior, or even, walking out the door, so that wandering behavior, just, I'm gonna go find something to do, and they're out the door, but without the ability to manage their environment. That wandering out the door is not necessarily the safest thing. So those seemingly sort of random activities are usually attempts to reduce boredom, and that's really important if you're working with a person living with dementia and you're seeing these behaviors that just seem very random and fidgety. That's a sign your person is saying to you, I'm understimulated, I'm bored. And then if prevented from doing those things, they may become irritated or angry, right? They have done their best to solve the problem that they're having, that understimulation. And if you're stopping them from doing that and not providing them a more appropriate task to be involved with, then you may see that irritation or anger. And then withdrawal is the other big one that you'll see. So that just sort of turning into the zombie person, right? When you think about, have you ever, I know a lot of people have thought about nursing facilities or been into a nursing facility, had somebody there, and there's that image that I think a lot of people have of all of the zombie people in the nursing facility, right? So they're just kind of sat in their chairs, staring at nothing. That is withdrawal symptom from understimulation. Not the same thing as being quiet and content. Quiet and content is a great place to be. Withdrawn and zombie, not what we want. Right, next slide. But there's also a possibility of overstimulation, right? So really, as we're get into talking about activities, we're looking for that sweet spot, because we've got the understimulation on one side with withdrawal and boredom and fidgeting behaviors, and overstimulation on the other side, which can lead to anxiety, fearfulness, confusion, agitation, those sorts of things. So sometimes the environment is full of activity. The surroundings, the people, the noises may be overwhelming and unfamiliar. Media such as television, radio, and other background noises can be distracting and distressing. When many sights and sounds combine, it can be almost impossible for someone with dementia to make sense of it, causing the person to become confused, frightened, or even angry. And then, as we're thinking about activities, engaged in an activity or attempting to engage in an activity that is above their skill level based on, where they are in the staging of the disease. That can also lead to that overstimulation. with the same, if they're engaged in a task that is well under their ability level, that can lead to understimulation. So again, you're really looking for that. What are the skills my person has? What ability do they have, and how can we engage them in things that are suitable? Find that sweet spot of contented involvement, right? All right, next slide. So you've got the 4 P's of engagement. You have preferences, plan, process, and provide support. So preferences, consider the person's likes, dislikes, hobbies, and interests when planning activities. Think about the time of day when the activity will occur so that the person's not feeling tired or hungry or perhaps experiencing sundowning, right? Remembering that your person or any person living with dementia is still a person. They are still that person, and their preferences and the things that they like are still important, right? So somebody, I don't know, wanted to take me fishing, even if it's a lovely activity and perfectly at my skill level, I am not going to enjoy that. There's worms and it's gross. No interest, right? Like, still a person. Plan. Having all the materials ready for the activity so that you can begin without delay or lags in the implementation, which will could lead to your person becoming distracted, right? So having that plan in place, the process. So when planning, keep in mind the stage of your person in the dementing illness and the skill level of your person. So keep it simple and encourage them to participate as much as possible. So part of that planning is, looking at, in that process is, what can they do? And then what are you going to need to do as the caregiver? So now we're providing support, right? So you may use visual or verbal cues as well as guiding touch techniques to provide support when needed to your person. So helping them to stay engaged, helping them to enjoy the task and not become overwhelmed. So that really becomes the role of the caregiver, is looking at that support, so providing support, the process, the plan, and the preferences, right? A person with dementia, planning becomes difficult, so this falls to the caregivers. Next slide. So starting with the person, do you know a person's personal preferences? Some questions you can ask the person or think about. So never assume that a person can't answer the questions until you've asked them. So you can ask, what's important to you? What were your routines? What activities did you enjoy or do you currently enjoy? What interests and hobbies do you have? What achievements make you proud or made you proud? What's comforting to you? What really makes your day, right? Like, what brings joy into your day? What do you talk about? Kind of thinking through those things, you can always ask your person. If it doesn't go well, then, step in and take a more active role in thinking through those things. But again, engaging the person. Always, always, always. All right, next slide. Engage in daily activities. So the goal here really is to help the person feel connected and involved. So remembering that this will give them that sense of purpose and normalcy, consider ways to include them with these common daily tasks, when you think about things like showering or bathing. Even a person who's needing support with that task, what are the things in there that they can do, right? So instead of, just taking over and doing the entire task from start to finish, maybe they need help getting soap onto the washcloth, but then they can rub it on their legs, or, whatever it is. So just always remembering to think about, where can my person be involved? What is their skill level? What can they do to be a part of this process, whatever it is? So whether it's getting dressed or grooming or preparing or eating meals, can they peel a carrot? Doesn't matter if you do 99.999% of the work and they spend the entire time working on peeling one carrot and it's still done pretty badly in the end. Nope. Doesn't matter at all if they enjoyed being a part of the task, if they were contentedly involved in what they were doing. Product, outcome, not the point, right? So completing tasks, it may take longer and it may require more supervision and involvement from you, but it does help to enrich their lives. So with that comes the caveat that as caregivers, there is a lot of stress, there's a lot on your shoulders, there are a lot of roles that you become responsible for. And so if having your person involved in particular tasks makes your life as a caregiver much more difficult or stressful, then that's not the task, that's not the time. So your needs are important too. But if you are able to slow down and step back and allow things to take a little bit more time, then it's really, really beneficial to have your person involved in everyday activities in whatever way they can be. Shopping. Do they have a grocery list? Maybe they're just holding the grocery list. Whether or not they can use it, not really important. You're going, what's next on the list? And you're just, involving them. And then you actually look at the list to see what's next, and that's okay. All right, next slide. So make a list of things that they enjoy. So starting with those personal preferences, thinking about activities that your person enjoys historically, considering how you can do those activities together, using varying levels of supervision and interaction. So things like, walking, gardening, going to ball games, playing board games, playing catch, cleaning, listening to or creating music, dancing. In the early stages, the person, might be able to knit or wind a ball of yarn. And later, they might just be able to sort the yarn by color. With supervision, a person might cook scrambled eggs, or they might just mix them. But again, the focus is not on skill or the product. The important aspect is the doing, right? The engaging in the activity. And, music, music, music. If you are willing to, music is so wonderful for the brain. It is such a strong way to connect for a person living with dementia. Sing, even if it's off key. Dance, listen to music. There's some really interesting outcomes when music is in people's lives. So I encourage you to try all of that. I also have up here, for anybody who wants one, I brought in, it's 50 activities, so it's an ideas list of things to do. And so it would be, taking this list and kind of starting to gather ideas of things you can do with your person living with dementia, and then, remembering to think about where their strengths are, where they are in terms of staging, and how can they be involved in that activity, right? What part can they take in designing some activities and plans for your person. All right, next slide. More activities to try. So, some of this is starting to look at some of that later stage dementia. So things like sorting objects can be really engaging if there's no risk of ingesting them. So, you make sure that your person isn't somebody who puts things in their mouths. If so, then whatever task you give them should be things that are larger than mouth size, probably. Thinking through things like that. Household tasks like folding towels or pairing socks can be familiar. And then, remembering that overlearned tasks, so things that people are able to do just sort of out of habit, things that you don't really have to think a lot about, tend to be things that a person with dementia retains for a much longer period of time, right? So if they were always the one to fold the towels, they very well may be able to just sort of do that out of habit for a longer period of time. There are things like fidget blankets, right? So that's a blanket or a piece of cloth that you sew things onto, like zippers and buttons, maybe a little bell, and they're just things that you just kind of can fidget with, and you can zip and unzip the zipper and put the button through the hole, and they're just for fidgeting. And in those later stages, even though where it may seem to you that this is not an engaged activity, for a person in late stage dementia, that may be a very contentedly involved and engaged activity. If it was somebody who used to sew or was a seamstress, those things with the zippers and things can feel very much like those activities from the past that, seamstressing, is that? I don't know. Anyway, so those can be really great things. Household tasks, coloring, that good stuff. Next slide. Themed activity totes. So you could build some themed activity totes for your person. Rummage box, kitchen items that they can, just sort of rummage and play with. For somebody who was into woodworking, there might be wood shopping tools, a sanding block. A person who liked woodworking where maybe they can't use the table saw and do the whole thing anymore, but just sanding a block of wood might be a very engaging activity for them. A shoe polishing kit, a travel box, looking at postcards and photos and maps for somebody who maybe really likes travel, sports themed, things like that. So those can be ideas and things that you can have on hand and can be really easy to grab if you're starting to notice some of those earlier behaviors we talked about that come from understimulation. And maybe they're starting to rummage through the kitchen drawers that need to stay organized, then maybe they should have a kit that that it's okay and it's not going to cause you as caregivers a whole lot of extra work and stress, because that's never the goal. All right, next slide. So pictures can really be a great tool for pleasant interaction. Pictures may be from the past, or they may be current topics, or even advertisements. And when you ask about the pictures, use the, who, what, where, when method. Who's that? What's happening in this picture? Where is this? When do you think this was? But remembering, of course, that we don't correct, right? So they may look at the picture and say, oh, that's Bob in Florida. And you're like, oh, that's Zach on a snowy day. Nope, now it's Bob in Florida. And that's okay. And you can say, oh, when did Bob go to Florida? And you can have a whole conversation, and you can have that interaction, and everybody's engaged and busy. And again, the facts, not what's important there. Yeah, so that can be a really great one. Next slide. So like I said, enjoy the answers. Being right is not the point. It's about engaging the person, right? So enjoy the answers. Sounds like, lovely story time. Okay, so the next slide, this is the one that's got that link. So we're going to see if this link works, and this is one of our colleagues from the Area Agency on Aging in Western Michigan, who has put together this great activity demonstration video, maybe. Okay, so, nope, that's okay. So we're going to do a send it out after if you all want to see it, because we are not technology gurus. But she has put together some of those activity totes that we talked about earlier. She's put together some of those and is kind of going through looking at how those might work and how you could engage somebody using those totes, and thinking about the different stages of dementia and how that impacts, what the caregiving role is, right? So how you would help to keep a person engaged in the activity, make sure that safety needs are being met, and also keeping that attention if possible. And sometimes remember, of course, that it's not possible. Sometimes the attention just isn't there, and the activity you chose just isn't the thing, and that's okay. You try again later. You can try something else. That happens. All right, so we'll move to the next slide then. So we've reviewed some options. So what are some examples of ways you can think of to include your person in more activities? Does anybody here, are you just gathering information? Is anybody a caregiver for somebody with dementia here? Any experience with a person living with dementia? Wow, that's so very rare. Yeah? Do you remember back to that experience and things that you may have done to help your person, or how you were setting tasks up to help your person engage in their lives and day-to-day? right. Yeah, and in the later stages, somebody will be. The ability of a person to continue living alone is going to decline, and you are going to bump up against those health and safety issues for a person with dementia living alone as you move into those moderate and later stages. But I did hear you say when you talked about going in because she was living alone and setting things up, I heard set up, for her to be able to continue to live alone. So you were engaging in those activities of set up so that she was able to continue to engage in those daily tasks of living in a way that suited her abilities. So whatever that might be, right? So it might be things like, in those early stages, getting a simpler phone set up so that a person can continue to reach out and connect with family and have an easier time making phone calls. It might be posting a, big, bold phone list next to the phone so that a person can remember the numbers that they need to call to reach somebody. It might be things like putting medications in a MedMinder for them because the organization piece has gotten difficult, but they're still able to take their meds on their own, so they're still engaging in those things. So I think you were doing these things. It was just in that, early stage setup. Is that one of the willows now? I don't know. No, there's the Metal Lodge on one side, and then which is a nursing facility, and then there's the assisted facility. Right. Yep. Yep. Anyway. Yeah. Yeah. Those things absolutely can help. I did hear that you said something about telling her that she wasn't in charge anymore. And I encourage you all, if you do find yourselves in a position working with somebody living with dementia, to come from a lens of supported decision making. So recognizing that some of their cognitive abilities are changing and they may not be able to think through everything clearly and plan and organize their thoughts in order to come to good and safe conclusions. And so while you are not taking over or telling people what to do, you are supporting them in making good and safe decisions by filling in those pieces that they might be missing in terms of health and safety considerations. And that might mean that you are making the decisions, but thinking of it in terms of supporting their decision making is just a little nicer on everybody, right? Okay. Next slide. So in the late stages of the disease, the person may not be able to engage in activities any longer or even talk. And the focus of caregiving in the situation really becomes to provide comfort for both of you. So helping the person be comfortable and to be comforted becomes the activity, right? So adjusting a pillow, holding hands, listening to their favorite music, all of these things can bring ease and connection. So that, may become the activity in that very late stage or end stage dementia. So sometimes the person living with dementia is not living at home, and in fact, frequently at this stage, the person living with dementia is no longer living at home, as that 24/7 and intensive care can often be more than families are able to provide. So visiting them becomes an activity. Routine activities and conversation may be limited. Some people feel uncomfortable visiting somebody who can't engage in conversation. And some families may find that visiting in pairs is a little bit easier. So you can kind of be together, but have somebody who can engage a little bit more to keep conversation flowing, right? And so the family members talk to each other and keep that conversation going. And then needing to assess if that seems to be bringing comfort to your person. So that, again, is going to depend on exactly where they are in their cognitive ability. So typically, we advise against talking around people. Nobody wants to be in a room where they feel invisible. And so if your person is still at a place where they would be able to recognize that, this would not be a good method. But if they have moved beyond that cognitive ability, then this could be a good method of engaging and creating that connection. All right, next slide. Observation, a caregiving tool. So we've talked about behavior as communication. As language skills become difficult, people rely on gestures, actions, or emotions to express their needs and wants. Caregivers will find it useful to observe their person and pay attention to body language. Are they fidgeting, pacing, sitting with a sad expression? Do they seem interested, relaxed, at ease? So recognizing those behavior cues will help you to respond appropriately and do what you need for your person without concern of other people's opinions, right? So do what you need to do, and we call it that clinical view. So you kind of find a place where you can step back from your emotional connection to your person. Pretend you're a nurse, right? And you're just observing your person from that clinical view. What's going on? Do they seem agitated or uncomfortable in any way? And then problem solving through that. Are you hungry, thirsty? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Those are the big first three. Is there a physical body need? And then, are you under or overstimulated? And what can we as caregivers do to change that for our person? Because they become less and less able to identify and then, make those changes for themselves. So, like we are able to, if you're feeling very overstimulated, you're at a loud party, and you've just had it. You're just done. You can recognize that feeling. I know for me it kind of sits right here. And I know that feeling, and I might step outside and get some fresh air. A person with dementia isn't able to understand what they're feeling or make changes on their own, so it really becomes up to caregivers to support that. All right, next slide. So, in summary, understanding dementia stages may help you with how to provide effective support to a person with dementia. Persons with dementia still want to feel purposeful and involved in activities of daily living, and activities are important to persons with dementia and can provide those opportunities for meaningful engagement and connection and build that sense of purposefulness and engagement in their own lives. All right, next slide. So you would be thinking about your person's preferences and the level of their ability. Thinking about, is there an activity that you can build in or structure that you can provide to help them enjoy their day and feel like they are contributing with purpose? And then carving out time for yourself. So the next session, part 3, is coming around to looking at self-care. And I hinted a couple of times in this presentation when we're really focused on supporting your person with dementia and what can you do as a caregiver to make sure that they're okay. But it has to be okay for you as caregivers as well. And that self-care piece is important. So that is what we are going to chat about next week. And then the next slide are those resources you can reach out to. You've got your area agencies on aging and the Alzheimer's Association and the National Institute on Aging, all with great resources around caregiving and dementia specifically. So that is what we have about activities for persons with dementia. Questions, comments?
Allie's got me on.
I'd just like to know if you have copies of your slides available, hard copies of your slides.
Well,
available?
I don't have hard copies with me. I would be happy to, will you be back for session 3? I can bring
hope to.
Slide printouts next week if that's something that you would like. And then I know that there's digital copies here that I'm sure Pastor Allie can get to you if that's a good way.
I do have one question. I remember reading the book, The 36-Hour Day. Have you heard of that book, and is that still a good resource?
I don't know that one.
It was written, it was out there at least 30 years ago, and it talked about, I think a lot of the things you may have talked about. I don't remember the activities part so much, but it talked about the self-care and just how you live or how you support somebody that's got Alzheimer's or whatever. So I don't remember who the author was. You remember the book, right?
Yeah, that's a book that has been updated over and over and over throughout the years. I assume they're still doing that. It's a great book because it talks about situations regarding the person that has the dementia, as well as support for the caregiver. Yeah, it's called 36-Hour Day.
I'll have to look into that one.
Yeah.
I have a bookshelf full of books on dementia and caregiving and
Unless for some reason it's been taken off the
I
shelves.
see you can get it at you can get it through Amazon for $15.
It's a fabulous resource. Yeah.
excellent. Well, that's a good one, or apparently, I don't know it, but I will absolutely believe you. If you're ever looking for any other resources, I know that LCC, they have the Mental Health and Aging Project, and they keep a good list of books that cover these topics. If that's something that you want, we have some at TCOA available, and then we've got caregiver series like this. And then there are also services and supports in the community where, I do these educational series, but I can also do one-on-one dementia consultations. So if that's something that, is ever needed, if there's anybody in your communities who, are really struggling with very specific and situational concerns that they'd like to sit down and chat about, that's something that TCOA can provide through me. So.
Rabins, R-A-B-I-N-S. It was updated, this says it was updated last in 2008. I don't,
That doesn't seem right.
no, that
Maybe
doesn't
that's
seem-
just what's available on Amazon. Well, maybe they're not updating it anymore.
the authors may not be around anymore, who knows? It's rated very highly, but anyway,
The other one that we often recommend, anything Teepa Snow. She's a big name in dementia care, and she's got some TED Talks and videos and books. And
What's the name of the book?
Teepa Snow is the author. It something with ease, is that the name of? She has a few books, but I recommend Teepa Snow frequently because she comes from that very strength-based perspective, which is something that I advocate as well. So looking for the strengths in your person and figuring out how those strengths will help you to help them, right? And so making sure that we're not taking away people's personhood and turning them into an illness, dementia in this case. So.
it was advertised as a family guide, caring for persons with Alzheimer's disease or related dementia illnesses and memory loss later in life. I found it helpful. Helps to understand what's going on a little bit. And so that would have been, I don't know when it was originally published.
I'm glad you were able to find it, having those resources to normalize what's happening and identify those tips and tricks and ways that you can engage with what's happening is so very important.
Yeah, there wasn't much out there at the time to tell you what to do.
Definitely become a much bigger conversation and more out in the open conversation. I think it was, for a long time, something that kind of got swept under the rug a lot as just a scary thing we don't want to talk about.
Right.
Anything else? Well, I'm really glad that you all came today. I hope that you will come back next week to learn about self-care, and that's a really great one. Of course, we're focusing on dementia because this is the Dementia Caregiver series, but self-care is something for everybody, and regardless of your situation as a caregiver or whatever else you have going on in your life, I think that there will be something in that self-care presentation that you can all take away. So I look forward to that, and I hope that you all have a wonderful afternoon.